and fear. And yet the man standing in front of him looked nothing like the ruthless legend Marcus had heard about. And before Marcus could process it, he realized the visitor was not listed as guest or consultant, but as chairman, private. And still Marcus didn't change his expression, didn't stutter, didn't suddenly bow or fawn. He simply smiled and signed. "Please have a seat, sir. I'll notify them you've arrived." And Arthur Hensley watched him closely as Marcus picked up the phone, speaking aloud now to the executive assistant upstairs, explaining calmly that Mr. Hensley had arrived, while simultaneously signing to Arthur what was happening. And when Marcus hung up, Arthur signed. "Most people talk louder when they realize I can't hear." And Marcus smiled softly and signed back. "My sister taught me better." And something in Arthur's face shifted then, a crack in the polished composure of a man who had built an empire and lost pieces of himself along the way, because no one had mentioned family to him in years, not without an agenda. And as they waited, a junior executive named Bradley walked by, stopped, and frowned openly at Marcus, whispering something sharp about interns staying in their place, about wasting time. And Marcus felt the familiar heat of humiliation creep up his neck. But Arthur saw it too, saw the way Marcus's shoulders stiffened. And when Bradley spoke directly to Arthur, slow and exaggerated, as if speaking to a child, Arthur did not respond. He simply looked at Marcus and signed, "Thank you for treating me like a human being." And those words landed heavier than any praise Marcus had ever received, because they were spoken in a language of trust. And when the executive assistant finally arrived, flustered and apologetic, Arthur rose, nodded to Marcus, and signed, "Don't lose that," before following her into the elevator. And Marcus exhaled, thinking that was the end of it. Just a nice moment in a day that would otherwise be forgotten. But upstairs, behind closed doors, Arthur Hensley did not begin the meeting with profit charts or strategy. He began by asking why a temporary intern knew sign language better than anyone on his executive floor. And when the room fell silent, he told them what had happened downstairs, every detail, including Bradley's condescension. And he asked a simple question that made million-dollar men shift uncomfortably in their chairs. How many opportunities have we missed because we don't know how to listen? And as the day unfolded, Marcus was called upstairs unexpectedly, heart pounding as he stepped into the executive elevator, rehearsing apologies in his head, convinced he had done something wrong. And when he entered the boardroom, the long table gleaming, the city spread out behind glass, Arthur Hensley stood and signed, "Marcus, sit." And Marcus obeyed, hands clasped tightly. And Arthur spoke aloud now, his voice measured, telling the room that he had been deaf since childhood, that he had learned to read lips to survive in a hearing world, that he had built his company by watching what others missed, but that somewhere along the way, the company had stopped seeing people. And then he turned back to Marcus and asked him to tell his story. And Marcus did, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, about Lila, about learning sign language on cracked sidewalks and crowded buses, about taking the internship unpaid because it was his only foot in the door, and about believing that respect should not depend on a title. And when he finished, the room was silent again. But this time, it was not uncomfortable. It was reverent. And Arthur announced that effective immediately, Marcus would be moved from unpaid intern to paid junior communications associate, with tuition assistance and a formal mentorship. And when Bradley tried to protest, Arthur silenced him with a look and added that the company would be launching a full accessibility initiative, including mandatory sign language training for front-facing staff, and Bradley would be leading it, under Marcus's guidance. And the irony was not lost on anyone, and as weeks passed, the story spread quietly through the building, then louder, then beyond it, when a leaked internal memo found its way online, and headlines followed, not about profits or scandals, but about a deaf CEO testing his own company by walking in unannounced and being met with dignity by an intern no one noticed. And Marcus became a symbol he never asked to be, interviewed by local news, invited to speak at schools, always redirecting attention back to accessibility, to kindness, to the idea that inclusion is not charity but intelligence. And at home, when he told Lila what happened, she signed back through tears, "You heard him before anyone else." And Marcus realized then that the real twist was not that the visitor was the CEO, but that the world had been quietly waiting for someone like him to remind it how to listen. And if this story moved you even a little, if it made you think about the way you greet strangers or overlook quiet strengths, then stay with us, subscribe, and keep listening, because the next story might be the one that changes how you see your own life.
If you've ever believed that kindness goes unnoticed, or that doing the right thing won't change your life, stop scrolling right now. This story will prove you wrong.
And before we begin, hit that subscribe button because stories like this remind us why humanity still matters, why quiet courage can shake the most powerful rooms in America, and why the smallest choice on an ordinary morning can rewrite an entire destiny. Because on a rain-soaked Monday in downtown Chicago, when most people were rushing past the glass tower of Hensley and Rowe Industries without looking at one another, a young black intern named Marcus Reed stood behind the reception desk on the 42nd floor, adjusting his borrowed tie with slightly trembling fingers, unaware that by the end of the day, his name would echo through boardrooms, headlines, and hearts across the country. And Marcus had not planned to be there that morning at all. His internship officially started next week, unpaid of course, because he had taken it anyway, coming from the South Side, where opportunity rarely knocked twice and rent didn't wait for dreams. And he had shown up early because that's what his grandmother taught him, that when you have nothing but your name, you guard it with punctuality and respect. So when the regular receptionist called in sick and the floor manager panicked, Marcus volunteered to cover the desk even though his badge still said temp intern, even though his palms were sweaty and his stomach empty from skipping breakfast to save money. And as the elevators chimed and executives poured out speaking in clipped tones about mergers and margins, Marcus greeted each one with a smile that came from years of learning how to be polite in spaces not built for him, until the elevator doors opened again and an older man stepped out slowly, dressed not in an expensive suit, but in a simple dark coat, his hair silver, his posture calm, his eyes observant in a way that made Marcus instinctively straighten his back. And the man approached the desk without speaking, tapping a finger lightly on the polished surface. And Marcus opened his mouth to greet him before noticing the subtle sign. The man pointed to his ear, shook his head gently, and smiled apologetically. And in that instant, without thinking, without pausing to wonder if it was appropriate or impressive or useful, Marcus lifted his hands and signed. "Good morning. Welcome to Hensley and Rowe. How may I help you?" And the man's eyes widened, not dramatically, not theatrically, but with the quiet shock of someone who had not expected to be understood. And he signed back, a little slower. "Thank you. I'm here for a meeting." And Marcus nodded, signing smoothly now, asking for a name, checking the visitor log, feeling the familiar comfort of a language he had learned not in school but at home, because his younger sister Lila had been born deaf, and Marcus had learned sign language as a kid so she would never feel alone at the dinner table, never feel invisible in her own family. And as he signed with the visitor, the noise of the lobby seemed to fade, executives glancing over with mild curiosity, one woman frowning as if annoyed that the interaction was taking too long, and Marcus found the name at last, Arthur Hensley, and his heart skipped, because that name was everywhere in the building, etched into walls, printed on awards, whispered with reverence and fear, and yet the man standing in front of him looked nothing like the ruthless legend